before I start, has anybody come across this term before? Ludology. Well, it actually means the study of play, but it has come to sort of encompass a general term for video game studies. Before we start, is there anybody here that would call themselves a gamer? Okay, so we've got a couple. Of the people that didn't raise their hands, is there anybody who plays video games? And this could be like solitaire on your phone or Angry Birds. Okay, so actually we've got this clear distinction straight away that there are people that might term themselves gamers, that might use it as a way of forming their identity. But there are also people who play video games but don't identify as a gamer, and actually video game studies would look at all of you, and they might not talk about subculture when they were talking about the second group, but this is something that you might be studied, as it were. There is a stereotype of a gamer which has thankfully been proven to be untrue, or less and less true as time goes on. There's the stereotype that it's a young male who is not very pro-social, who has no social skills, that kind of thing. But actually, 48%, 47% I think, of gamers in the US are female. And the percentage of adult female gamers is actually higher than the percentage of young boys that play, 17 and under. So there's quite a wide demographic when we talk about gamers. I'm a gamer. I grew up through the consoles. I was a child weaned on the Sega Mega Drive. I was a teenager with the Nintendo 64, and now I'm an adult with an unhealthy attachment to my Xbox 360. And I had an epiphany. I actually studied Chinese studies for 5 years, and I was getting quite bogged down with it. It had gone on long enough. It was quite a stressful thing to do because it's heavily politicized and it's always in the media, and I felt like I always had to have an opinion on things. And I woke up one morning and realised that actually I could study whatever I wanted, and what I'm interested in is video games, and that's why I'm here talking to you. But the first thing I realised when I decided to study video games is people would want to know why. Why are you going to spend 4 years of your life looking at this? When they're considered a low art, what's the point? And even video game scholars feel like they have to justify their interest in video games because the field is only 15, 20 years old. There's still this argument that's being had within academic circles as to why they're important. And to those people, I'm going to give you some reasons as to why I thought it was important to study. The first one is the most obvious one. Video games are big business. They're economically powerful. They're a multi-billion-dollar organisation, or a multi-billion-dollar industry in America. Over half, I think, of American households own a console, so that's just console gaming. And those that own a console are more likely to own two than own one. They're also socially and culturally powerful, both in the ways that they can reflect society, as we've been hearing about how media can do, but also in the ways that they can influence society and culture. Video games aren't cheap. You spend a long time playing them. It can take tens of hours, hundreds of hours to complete a video game. So they can be something that if you can get unintentionally invested in the game world, unintentionally invested in a franchise, and also invested in the subculture. Beyond the economic power, they're also, the social power, they're also psychologically and physically powerful. There's several questions that really have yet to be answered or have yet to be explored to their full extent within game studies. What happens to a gamer when they're transported, into the game world? How do gamers construct their identities, both online and offline? And what happens inside the brain when we play video games? I'm just going to give you an overview now of what has been done already. The first thing that's been done, the most obvious one, is links to aggression. Do violent video games make people violent? A lot of the things that have been studied are the things that people worry about, are the things that are talked about in the media. And you know, the jury's out on whether violent video games actually make you aggressive. A lot of studies have proven that they do, and a lot of studies have proven that they don't. There is a temporary reduction, one study said, in pro-sociality after a video game. So just temporary afterwards. But that disappears after a while. There have been links, for example, with children playing violent video games and being more violent in schools, but only if they play video games for more than 4 hours a day. But these are things that are still being contended because the academic research is only about 20 years old. Another big group, obviously, that's been studied is children. Not just do video games make children violent, but also do they make them unable to concentrate, do they make them lazy, those kinds of things. And finally, the portrayal of women. This is sort of big business at the minute. A lot of people, when they talk about the portrayal of women in video games, love to talk about Lara Croft. She is everybody's favourite. There's so many articles on her. Are video games, do they sexualise women? If yes, is it more problematic than when other media, for example, sexualises women? But also more nuanced and interesting questions like, what happens when you create an identity, create an avatar that is perhaps a different gender to your own? How does that interact with the way that you see yourself and the way that you invest in the game? So how do we study video games? There's a big divide that came up in the early noughties, and it's called the narratology-ludology split. The narratologists, first of all, are people that have mainly come through media studies into the study of video games, and they think that a lot of emphasis needs to be placed on content analysis. You know, doing analysis that's very similar to Seb's, for example, employing things from critical theory or philosophy, sociology, even these kinds of things. Film studies, obviously, is an obvious one. But there are problems with this approach. Video games are a lot more interactive, arguably, than other media. You know, if you sit there and you don't touch the controller, often nothing happens in the game, or you get to the end of a cutscene and then nothing happens. So it does require quite a lot of input from the player. So the ludologists, I don't know why I've got that. So yes, it's not enough just to do content analysis. The ludologists would argue that it is something that they've termed, Jesper Joule has termed it the video game's gameness. That it's the gameness that matters, and not the content, not the themes, not the characters, not the design. But it is how you are able to interact with the video game. So they would look at video game mechanics, such things as the video game rules, what you can and can't do within the game world, how that kind of thing is structured. They would look at the interface. You know, every console, every video game has a different way of interfacing the player with the game, and also a video game's artificial intelligence. The artificial intelligence that governs the way that non-player characters and enemies interact with the player. And for example, racing games, if you're playing with a friend and you're at the front, the game makes it harder for you, and if your friend's at the back, the game makes it easier for the friend, because competition makes a game more fun. And actually, if one person is vastly better than the other, there's less fun in it. So it's these kinds of things that ludologists would say are the most important things to study. So, surprisingly, they've only recently realised that they're not mutually exclusive, that actually you can look at both within one paper. And then the third approach has been to look at actually people's response to video games, psychophysiological testing, looking at skin conductance and facial electromyography and heart rate, you know, and how do people react to video games. It is insightful, but all these approaches are only one piece of the puzzle in really explaining the experience of a game, how it feels to game and what it does to us. Ludology and video game studies is still finding its feet. And I suppose one of the things that I would like you to take away from this is whatever department you're from. I mean, I saw that people were from history or art, whether you're from biology or maths or philosophy, anything, film studies, is that because this discipline has no taxonomy, it has no language, shared language that has been developed yet for video game studies, it doesn't even really have a methodological toolkit. I'd be interested to hear how you think that your discipline and your area of studies could somehow contribute to this, because it's not, there aren't many academic departments set up just for video game studies. You get there's I think one in Utrecht and there's some in Helsinki, but we're all, video game scholars are all working within other departments. You know, I'm within the sociology department, so I'm doing video game studies with a sociological slant. And other people are doing the same from their department, so I'd just like you to think about how your work could tie in with this, really. And that's the end.